So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and this is another episode of Backroads Arizona. In this video, I'm going to be doing a quick review of the electric power steering that I put in my little sand car that I've got. And I'm also going to be going over my trip to Glamis the weekend before Thanksgiving 2022. So this was a pretty eventful trip, guys. I had a minivan get stuck right outside of my camper. After watching them guys for about a half an hour and them getting a little too close to my camp, I decided to get involved and help those guys get that minivan out of there. I actually got stuck on my way out of Glamis, and I'm going to show you some things that you should have in your supplies to help you get out of a situation like this. We actually made a stop at the sand drags right off of Gecko Road, and I've got some footage of that and of Oldsmobile Hill. I actually had a close call with a quad as I was coming down Oldsmobile Hill and he was going up. And I'm going to go over a couple things that I ended up adding to my RZR and sand car because of that situation. So if you're new to the dunes, this video would probably really help you out. And if you're a seasoned veteran at the dunes, you might get a kick out of some of the stuff that's happened to me on this trip, or you might be able to relate to it and find it a good time. I fit somewhere right between those two categories, but I have had a lot of shit happen to me. Here is a chapter index of what takes place in this video and what time it happens. In case you don't need to watch the whole thing, you can bypass what you don't need to see, so I don't waste your time. So let's get to it. So the main purpose of this video is to give you guys an initial review of the electric power steering unit that I added to this little sand car I've got. This unit is actually out of a 2014 Kia Soul. So I had a few concerns about this install. One was the angle of the drive shaft where it actually attaches to the rack and pinion and whether that was going to bind up at all. And I had no issues with that whatsoever. It was perfectly smooth out at the dunes. And I did drive this thing for about 4 to 5 hours minimum at the dunes this weekend. Another big concern I had about running this electric power steering is how much of a draw or load it was going to put on the electrical system on this sand car. The engine that's running on this sand car is actually an Apex engine out of a snowmobile. And the charging system on this Apex engine is a stator assembly, so it's not like I could go to a larger alternator size to keep up with the draw. Surprisingly enough, I put a voltage gauge on this little sand car so I could monitor it. And it really did not affect the battery voltage much at all. The two main draws on this little sand car is the electric fan for the radiator. That would draw it down a full volt. The other thing that was putting a pretty heavy load on this little car was the LED light bar that I added, and it would also take it down a full volt as well. So if I was doing a long straight shot, I would maintain about 14 volts. If I was doing a bunch of steering, it would drop down to about 13.5, maybe a little less. If the electric fan came on and I was steering a lot, then I would get down into the 12.6 range. And then a couple times when I went out on a little night ride, if I had the electric fan going, I was steering a lot and the LED light bar was on, I was dropping into the 11s, which was making me a little nervous. So for the most part, I don't see a problem with running this electric power steering. I'm really content with the fact that my battery voltage was able to maintain for the most part. And I'm really not a big one on the whole night riding thing. I have done it, but it's not something I do very often. There's a quick video of the size of the battery, so you can really see I don't really even have that big of a battery as far as a reserve goes for what that battery voltage is doing. One oversight that I did have with the install of this unit is you can see here I'm getting some sand and debris in that bearing that is at the top of the steering column. I ended up just welding on a yoke to the end of the steering shaft, and what I should have done is cut the end of that shaft off, welded a spline shaft so I could do a bolt-on yoke, and that way I could put a boot over that to protect that bearing. So overall, I'm really content with the way this is working so far, besides that minor oversight that I had with that boot over the steering shaft. So closer to the end of this dune season, I'll do another update video to let you guys know whether anything else happened with this unit, good or bad. And if you are interested in the actual install of this power steering unit, I will post that video at the end of this one so you can check it out if you want to. So now I'm going to get into the most interesting thing that happened over this weekend. We were almost asleep on Friday night, and I had some red flashing lights that I could see out of my one window. Once I realized that they were not getting farther away, that they were just sitting there, I decided to get up and look what was happening, and there was a minivan stuck about 15 yards from our campsite. So when I go camping at the dunes, I do try and get away from a lot of the idiocracy that happens in the more crowded areas. So I was pretty far back, and I was rather impressed that this minivan made it back this far, but I did know that they weren't going to make it out of this without some help, which I had no intention of giving them until they showed up with a Jeep, and we're out there for another 20 minutes or so without making any progress whatsoever. They were also getting way too close to my campsite when trying to pull out that minivan that I was worried whatever strap they were using could break and they might lunge into my razor or toy hauler. So at this point, I got some clothes on and went out there, and I couldn't believe what they were actually tied off to on the minivan to try and pull it out. Now keep in mind, this is 4 grown-ass men. Granted, they were probably in their late teens, early 20s, but irregardless, I don't know what made them think that this was a good idea. They actually had the rope tied around the tire and wheel on the right rear of that minivan. When I asked them why they had the rope wrapped around something that needed to roll in order for them to get unstuck, all they said was there was nothing else to tie it to. I actually went underneath the back end of that minivan, and they were pretty accurate as far as that goes. There wasn't much to tie to. So at this point, we tried pushing it a couple times with a couple more bodies. That didn't work. And then I came up with the idea of opening the back hatch and tying the rope to the striker where the door latches. Much to my surprise, that latch did hold up, and they were able to pull it in reverse out onto a little harder surface. When I got back into our camper, my wife asked me, were they high, drunk, or just young? And I said I think it was a combination of all three. Now, unfortunately, this video is me getting stuck. I was trying to leave Sunday morning. Now, I knew there was a little bit of a soft spot when I was going to be leaving, so I didn't even bother loading the razor or hooking up my second trailer, because I do haul doubles to the dunes quite a bit for the other sand car. I was keeping my momentum going, and I got about 3/4 of the way through that soft spot before it started burying itself. And since I have too much pride to go and ask for help, because I figure if I'm dumb enough to put myself in this situation, I need to be smart enough to get myself out of it. Now, obviously, my best option would have been just to grab the razor and hook it up immediately to the front of the truck and help pull it out. However, I had the razor with my wife watching the other sand car and the trailer way out by the road. So the first thing I tried was using some wooden blocks that I had cut out to help stabilize the trailer and digging under the rear tires and putting the blocks under there. That did work, but as soon as I got off those blocks, I could not keep my momentum going, and I would immediately start burying myself again. Now keep in mind that spinning the tires, especially in the sand, is about the worst thing you can do. 9 times out of 10, you're just going to make your situation worse. So you'll notice as soon as I started spinning the tires, I would stop and resituate my blocks or dig it out a little bit more, because if you're spinning those tires and you're not going anywhere, all you're doing is burying yourself deeper. Now, because I come out to the dunes quite a bit by myself, I wanted to try and find something that would help me get unstuck if I was out in the sand car or the razor. So there were some old pieces of conveyor belt that I could get my hands on, and I cut those about 8 inches wide and about 3 feet long. My thought was I could dig that under the tire and give me a flat surface to roll up on, and so I wouldn't bury myself. My theory was good, however, as soon as it got completely under the tire, it would just fling it out the back of the tire. So I might be drilling some holes in those and getting some stakes to try and anchor them in the front so they can't spit them out the back. So some things to take with you, just in case you do have something like this happen to you, is definitely bring a shovel. You definitely want some type of a tow strap. Those blocks actually worked really well. However, I could only go like 1.5 feet at a time. So I might just grab like 4 2x4s that are 4 feet long. Once I got up on the one 2x4, I would put the other one in front of it. Once I was onto that one, I would take the one from the back and go to the front. And that way I could definitely cover some ground and get myself out of that soft sand if necessary. After I got a little frustrated, I finally gave up and ended up calling the wife back with the razor. And we hooked that up with a tow strap, put that razor in 4 low, and then feathered both the truck and the razor with the throttle until I got onto harder ground where I could disconnect. So I do think my conveyor belts have some potential as far as helping getting unstuck. I just have to modify them a little bit, and if I do that and they end up working out, I will post an update video to let you guys know about it. Now we're going to get into some footage from Oldsmobile Hill and the drags. So this is midday at Oldsmobile Hill on Saturday, the weekend before Thanksgiving, and it was pretty busy. I actually came out here with my sand car when it was just me and one of my kids, and we were coming down Oldsmobile Hill at this point, and there was a quad coming up at this point. Now, he didn't have a very tall whip on him on that quad, and I definitely didn't see him because of that little hill, and we had a very close miss. I actually throttled up and turned to the right, and he did the same thing. Now, it's hard to say if he would have had a bigger flag or a taller whip, whether I would have been able to see him, but it definitely wouldn't have hurt. You'll notice with all of the vehicles out here at Oldsmobile Hill, the bigger the flag and the taller the whip, the easier it is to identify them, especially when you're coming over blind corners or hillsides, and that happens a lot out at the dunes. After this happened, I actually went back to vendor row in Glamis and upgraded my whips and the flags, and I went 7 foot tall with my whips, and I ended up getting 3x5 flags. So I was really surprised at vendor row. The prices weren't that ridiculous. We ended up getting the 1/2-inch fiberglass whips, 7 feet tall, for $10 a piece. The 3 foot by 5 foot flags varied in price from $10 and up, depending on the vendor. We did end up paying $40 a piece for these quick disconnect fiberglass whip holders. They also had some 1/2-inch whip holders that were $20 a piece, but they were not quick disconnect, and believe me, the extra $20 a piece for that quick disconnect is well worth it. For example, the wind was whipping like crazy pretty much all weekend, and instead of letting the wind beat the shit out of the flags all night long, because you can already see the wind was already taking some abuse on these things, I was able to take the extra 30 seconds and just disconnect them and put them in my trailer for the night. And I guarantee you, if I hadn't have got the quick disconnect ones, I would have never taken them down like that, because you had to use an Allen wrench to install and remove the whips from the holders. So just keep that in mind. We actually ended up going to 3 different vendors on vendor row to get the best deal. And there was only one vendor in the entire place at the time we were there that actually had these 1/2-inch quick disconnect style whip holders. So the rest of this video, guys, is just some cool footage from Oldsmobile Hill and the drags, if you want to stick around for that. One safety tip, guys, if you are going to check out the drags, we started out about halfway down the line, and there was 1 or 2 trucks that got a little squirrely, and if that would have gone bad, they could have shot off into the crowd. So we ended up going right to the beginning of the line, and that way we got to see the wheelies really good, and it's where most of the excitement is anyways, and it's a lot safer not being down where they're going 70, 80 miles an hour, possibly losing control. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible so I don't waste your time. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.